Hey YouTube, this is David Matthew Walker. This is a video summary on the third chapter of my book, The Theory of God Relativity. The chapter is entitled God and Religion. So, this chapter is, the point of this chapter was to illuminate that the book, the theory that I have that the substance of life is determined by its position relative to God, has nothing to do with religion. In fact, if you look at the definitions of religion, the first couple of definitions, they all relate to how we view the universe or an explanation of the universe. You know, how God created the universe or what God's created the universe. It's always a means to answer a inquiry that we have about the nature of the universe. It's never based on God Himself or God itself. We won't get into personal pronouns just yet. We will by the end of this, but not just yet. So, what happens is that religion is kind of like man's way of fitting God into a box that we can categorize, right? So, some people may view God one way. Some people may think that this is God. Some people think that is God, or this is how God does things. Religion is subjective, and it's weaker than science in that sense that it's subjective. So who's to say which religion is the authoritative religion, right? So the focus of this book is about what God thinks, not about what we think, not about what we think about God, but what God thinks, what God says. So the challenge then becomes, okay, well, if it's about what God thinks, which scriptures were inspired by God? We have holy scriptures and multiple faiths that claim to have been inspired by God, right? Or by God's Spirit, or something along those lines, right? About holy prophets or whatever, right? So, how do we determine what the right one is, right? And in my book, I propose that the God of the Protestant Bible is the God. As such, from this point forward, when referring to God, I will refer to God as a He, right? Because He self-identifies as a He. Well, we'll get into a little bit more of that next chapter when we talk about God Himself, but for now, suffice it to say, He identifies as a He. Now, the question becomes, why have I selected the Protestant Holy Bible of Christianity as a basis for who God is? Obviously, I'm biased because I grew up in Western society, and Western society has a heavy Christian influence. As a matter of fact, if I were just looking for a religion objectively, I probably would have chosen, a Buddhist faith or the Baha'i faith. But the reality is that the Holy Bible is the only book that I've been able to find in my research that God Himself speaks, and the whole book is about what He says, what He wants, and we can't even do right except through His help. It's like we're forced to humble ourselves before Him, right? So that makes the most sense to me because, as if you watch the last video, a deistic view of God is functionally no different than a randomly selected, natural selection and random mutation, right? So why would He be deistic? If He isn't deistic, He's most likely going to be a personal God. Now we talk about pantheism, and we will talk about pantheism later, but suffices to say, right now, it makes the most sense for God to be a personal God because there's a personal touch in life. There's a personal touch in creation, the butterfly, the cloud, there's personal touches to everything, and it makes sense for God to be a personal God. And the Holy Bible is a book where he speaks as a personal God, and he talks about what he wants, and he talks about when he's angry, and that's the perspective that we get. Therefore, that's the perspective that I've used with the book, and with that perspective, I've been able to I have a series of structural paradigms that we get into in my book, and he's able to sufficiently meet the requirements of those structural paradigms, which we'll find out later. I do have an objective framework that compares, different gods to see if, which objective God meets all of these requirements, and that's further in the book. But at any rate, beyond the fact that the Bible is written from a personal God's perspective and what He wants, there's also prophecies in the Bible that it would have been really hard to kind of like for all those to be coincidental. Probably the biggest argument against Christianity is, oh well, it was invented, by these people who wanted power over others and so on and so forth. And I understand that that the Christianity that came after Constantine was different than the original Christianity, and there is an element of control and abuse of Scripture that is rampant in Christianity, and it exists till this day. But if you just read the Scripture itself, there's nothing in there that encourages one to advance themselves in life, or take advantage of somebody else, or get rich. The Scripture tells you to seek God with all your heart. Don't hang on to these worldly things, these worldly pleasures, and so on and so forth. So for you to try to create power through Scripture, it just doesn't make sense, right? And at any rate, there's a couple other things that I bring up on the chapter, much more eloquent in the chapter. These videos are a little bit more informal, just kind of trying to get the general gist of the chapter. I probably would have normally redone this video, but I'm going to just kind of be a little bit more informal, just kind of jibber jabber if I need to, and if it sucks, it sucks. Excuse my language. But at any rate, going forward, we are going to use the biblical account of God, who God is, and we will use that in the theory, right? The theory that the substance of life is determined by its position relative to that God, right? So I ask that at this point that all of your preconceived notions about Christianity and the hypocrisy of Christianity and all these things that I understand there's a lot of issues, I get it. I ask that you kind of suspend any preconceived notions that you have, because a lot of this book is going to be unraveling or unlearning a lot of the things that you may have learned, or you may have heard, or misinterpretations of Scripture, or Scriptures taken out of context, and so on and so forth. So I ask that you just kind of bear with me with a monotheistic view of God, and hopefully we will get to some of the explanations as to why that is the most legitimate, and I feel the only real way that if God exists, that's how God would be. Right? So a link to the site will again be in the description. If you feel enriched by this video or any of the others, please support me by purchasing my book. There's a lot of things in the book that you'll get that I won't have in these videos, including diagrams and so on and so forth. And again, I'm a lot more eloquent, and things are things are expressed a little cleaner in the book, as opposed to just my free thought. So yeah, I'll see you next video.